So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Colonel Lucy Giles, and I'm delighted to be hosting the final part of this webinar, which is all focused on the future. I am joined today by three fantastic panelists, Baroness Sue Campbell, Bill Sweeney, and Richard Heitner. So first of all, Sue Campbell, she trained as a PE teacher. She taught in Manchester and lectured at Loughborough and Leicester universities. In 1995, after holding positions in the Sports Council and National Coaching Foundation, she helped found the independent charity called the Youth Sport Trust, becoming its chief executive and later its chair. In April 2005, Sue was appointed as chair for UK Sport. She held this position for 2 terms until April 2013, where she presided over Team GB and Paralympic GB's incredible performance at the London 2012 Games. Sue was appointed head of women's football with the Football Association in March 2016 and became director of women's football in January 2018. She's had numerous national honours and awards, and her most recent one was to be awarded Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire in December 2019 for all her services to sport. Welcome, Sue, to the panel. We're also joined by Bill Sweeney. In his early business career, Bill has held some senior roles at Adidas and Puma and has had corporate management experience with Shell, Mars, and also Unilever. But he did all of this before serving nearly 6 years as Chief Executive Officer at the British Olympic Association. During his tenure, Team GB had a record-breaking London 2012, Rio 2016, and he delivered the best ever performances at 2 consecutive Winter Olympic Games as well. Thank you, Bill, and welcome to the panel. And finally, it's a great delight to welcome a fellow director for the Foundation of Leadership Through Sport. Richard Heitner is a former worldwide deputy chairman of Saatchi & Saatchi, otherwise known as the Blue Hat Man. He facilitates courageous, candid conversations among leaders and all of their teams. He coaches senior leaders in business, policing, and sport, working recently with both the Premier League's Elite Heads of Coaching programme and with Premier League Productions. Richard's book, Consigliere, Leading from the Shadows, is a celebration of the craft of the leaders behind the leader. He co-founded the Manchester United Supporters Trust, which offers provocation and ideas to the board of Manchester United, pushing for fan ownership of the club and across football. A very warm welcome to all three of you. Now, before we look at future challenges and perhaps the opportunities that may be presented, I'd first of all like to ask the panel to describe their experience of leading through what they describe as a crisis. So if we could start, first of all, with you, Richard, please.
Thank you so much, Lucy. I'm humbled by the kind of crises that our previous panelists and speakers have lived through. So I've deliberately chosen to reinterpret the exam question quite unashamedly. I've gone back to my history A-level definition of a crisis, which is a turning point. Because in truth, I've never handled a crisis the magnitude of those that we've been listening about. The kind of turning point I have been part of was a turning point in what was then a very commoditized advertising industry. And as part of the leadership team, the global leadership team of Saatchi & Saatchi, the creative company. And we took a view that in the context the industry was facing with the onset of technology, the disruptive technologies, the emergence of tech giants like Google, we felt our industry context was shifting dramatically and that we needed to transform our company from an advertising agency to a creative ideas company capable of operating in the C-suite, in the boardroom. And I reflected on how well we did, knowing that we were together today. And I feel that, unsurprisingly, I guess, because we had such an inspirational leader, a kind of Eddie Jones maverick, charismatic leader, and that we had a culture that gave people on the front line incredible autonomy, we enjoyed quite a bit of success in some of the 100 or so markets in which we operated. But for precisely the same reason, we also failed in some markets too. We had this inspirational, charismatic leader. We had restless, driven, ambitious people given autonomy to lead. And of course, they had their own ideas. They didn't take the global idea hook, line, and sinker. So I would say we had partial success. And what it's made me think about as a leader, or as a leader in the collective endeavor, is a crisis, a real crisis, the kind of which we're talking about now, might well have increased our success rate, because it might have increased the urgency with which people felt we needed to transform. Absent that real crisis, I don't think enough of our people gripped the alternative of the crisis, which is the opportunity. So I learned an enormous amount, and I offer this case up really because so much of what we've heard is successful. I think this was a partial success only.
Well, what about yourself, Sue? Can you describe your leadership through a crisis?
Yeah, I've given it quite a lot of thought. I think for me, I'm not going to describe one particular one, although I think the one we're in at the moment is probably as difficult as any crisis we've all had to manage our way through. The first thing for me is when a crisis happens, there is that sort of sense of panic. And one of the great things I think is to get real clarity of thought. So for me, it's one of those situations where you need to go slow, but you need to hurry up at the same time, because crisis requires immediate action, but equally it's very important you take the time to think. So for me, one of the big lessons is get clarity. And then I think remind everyone about, I know this sounds, might sound a bit glib, but remind everyone about the purpose. Because through a crisis, constancy of purpose acts like a rudder. It sort of takes you through the water. And if you lose sight of that, then you start to go left and right. So constancy of purpose, clarity of thought. And then I think something that was in the last session is very important is the way we communicate. I've probably, during the COVID crisis, I've probably spoken one-to-one with every one of my colleagues far more than I've probably done when I've been in the office. I may have had casual conversations in the office, but I've had purposeful conversations. And I think something that again was said in the previous session, it's important that you check in with people's physical and mental wellness before you start talking about the issues in hand, because people can get off balance in a crisis. And, I'm lucky, I'm surrounded by extremely talented people and colleagues that are helping me, together we're taking the women's game forward. But they all react very differently in a crisis environment. And my job as the leader is to be able to support each of them in their own very personal and unique way, not take over in any way. It is about empowerment, but each person requires very different kind of support. And I guess the other and final thing for me is to be unafraid of the uncertainty. I think crisis often means we're not sure what's next. So we can start to see risk. I call risk challenge. I don't like the word risk, and they keep on producing risk registers for me. And I keep saying, I don't want them, thank you. I want challenge registers. I know there are some real risks, but mostly things are challenges which can be dealt with. But it's being unafraid to identify and address uncertainty, because that's what unnerves people. So for me, to steer the ship, if you like, through a storm, it's being really clear where you're going, purpose. It's hanging on to that rudder, making sure that you don't lose sight of that, being really clear about how you're going to get through that storm together, and then having the bravery to just, keep the boat moving forward. And if anything, to speed up what you're doing, as opposed to do the opposite, which often happens in a crisis. People start to stand back and slow down. And I think you have to kind of grab it and move with it. And I would say during the COVID crisis, we've got more done, more creative, innovative thinking and work done than we've done in the whole 4 years I've been at the FA. So those would be the things that, I think have helped me through crises.
That fantastic. So Bill, can you describe your experience of leading through a crisis as well?
Yeah, and there's some similarities there with what Sue's just said, and a lot of similarities with what people said on the previous sessions. I should probably kick off, by the way, just clarifying 1 or 2 points from your introduction. I can't take any credit whatsoever for London 2012. I joined the BOA after that. That was all down to Sue. But Rio was a remarkable experience. And then in May 2019, I left the BOA, and I'm now the CEO of England Rugby, so the RFU. So and that's been quite an interesting, or is quite an interesting challenge at the moment. I think I've thought about some of the other challenges and crises I've managed through, and I had one particular big one in the US, but I've just got to focus on this one. I mean, this is totally exceptional in terms of the demands it's made. And on March the 23rd, to go in 24 hours overnight to have 80% of your revenue switched off, complete uncertainty in terms of when would we come out of lockdown, total uncertainty in terms of when would life return to anything like normal. And if you go back to March, there's no way that we would have thought, I think, that we were still possibly under threat of no matches in February, March of 2021. I mean, who knows? We could have a third lockdown and whatever. So it's totally unprecedented in terms of the challenges it's put up. I'll be honest, it's been incredibly challenging. It's relentless. Sometimes you feel you go 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. But having said all of that, I wouldn't have missed it for the world. And I know that sounds a bit selfish, but I think if you want to be tested, if you actually feel that you want to be tested and you want to see what you're up to and what you're capable of and what your team's capable of, then this is just absolutely remarkable. And the learnings over the last 8 months and what we've been through so far have been absolutely incredible. I think if I go back to the start, it was the immediacy and the urgency in the first days, really, not weeks. It was a catastrophic event on March the 23rd, and you immediately went into, and I sort of broke it down very quickly into 3 phases. So the first phase was very much about how do we survive this, and literally, I don't choose that word glibly. How do we survive what is really a existential threat to the business, and how do we react? But also, how do we put support mechanisms in place when you're responsible for 2,000 rugby clubs around the country, who are your membership, who are facing massive amounts of uncertainty themselves? And then the second phase for us was, well, we need to already start planning for the reopening phase and the short-term planning that goes with that. And then thirdly, we very quickly got into, well, we don't want to just restart. We actually want to reimagine and reshape the way we're structured to take on the new future and the new landscape that's going to be waiting for us when we come out of this situation. So you had those 3 different phases, really. But the challenging thing was that normally in business and in life, things tend to be quite linear. But what was happening here was these 3 things were happening concurrently. They weren't consecutive. So you had to have a totally different mindset at any given point of the day, which was immediate survival and reaction, short-term scenario planning, and long-term reshaping of the organization, which led us into some really painful restructurings and loss of people through no fault of their own situation. So that's been, so how do you get through that, I suppose, is one of the questions. First one, I think, I can't remember who mentioned it before, was just a real immediate recognition that I can't personally do this alone. And therefore I am going to have to delegate. And for somebody who likes a bit of control and likes to be hands-on, I'm going to have to delegate an awful lot of responsibility here for us to be able to get through this. So we set up 9 working groups in 24 hours, focusing on certain aspects, key aspects of the business we knew would be high profile, things like medical, relationships with government, stakeholder management, operations in the stadium, HR, people welfare. So nine specific groups in terms of working groups in terms of what was going on, and they met daily and they fed back on a daily basis, and then recap and go through the progress that was being made. We set up a 9 o'clock in the morning executive team session every day for an hour. That's still going on 8 months later, and it's indispensable. It's really good. We set up a board meeting every week, which is crazy. We only meet normally once every 3 months. We had a weekly board meeting, which has now gone to one every 3 weeks. So there's a totally different level of communications happening, and the need to disseminate information as much as you possibly can. The critical thing, and because of all that, is I think the most important thing in a period like this, when there's so much uncertainty, is you have to provide whatever levels of clarity you can, and you have to provide some degree of hope and optimism. And even in an uncertain world, what are the things that we are in control of, and what are the things that we can control, and not get distracted by the stuff that really, frankly, we can't manage. And that took us into endless scenario plannings. We started off with letter A, we got to B, I think we're on D something now, and multiple numbers of them. So all sorts of various different scenarios. Every one of them was wrong. So therefore you could say that the planning process and the scenario planning process was a waste of time, but it was actually indispensable in terms of the whole team getting familiar with what are the levers that we have to pull to enable us to get through this, whichever the outcome is, and therefore feeling you've got some degree of control over your own destiny. So I think that was absolutely critical as well. We came up with a phrase, and it was I think Frank actually came up with the phrase in connection with the England team. We adopted it for the organization as well, which was, you just got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. If you wake up or you go to bed on a Sunday night and you think you've got the next week planned out, or if you wake up on a Monday morning and you expect and think that you've got everything under control, it's just not going to happen. Because in this environment, the one thing you can be guaranteed of is unpredictability and volatility. So therefore, try and embrace it and try and actually enjoy it, and try and say, I'm not quite sure what this week's going to give us, but let's get really comfortable with those challenges, almost welcome it, and then get to a stage where we feel we're capable of taking anything on. And I think we've got to a situation where it's like that. We've moved now into a slightly different element now. I think with time and getting used to this situation, we're able to narrow down on the various different potential outcomes and scenarios. And so therefore there's a lot more focus in terms of what we think is likely to come out of that. And also what's happened through this period has been there's an absolute explosion in productivity. So if you look at the decisions, the number of decisions that we're making daily, weekly, revising the entire strategic direction, revising the structure of the organization, doing things incredibly quickly to get it done. And the productivity has gone through the roof, but it was initially fueled by adrenaline because it was exciting. People hadn't worked from home before, and therefore there was a freshness to it. That freshness has worn off completely now. So you're now in a situation where you're actually living at work. And how do we maintain that same degree of productivity? How do we maintain that same degree of energy in the face of all the challenges that come with that? Because it's not sustainable off adrenaline alone. So we're spending a lot more time now in terms of some of the well-being issues. And there's something, there was a book I read recently, which I'm trying to now sort of bring into the organization a bit, which is, don't get obsessed with time management, but get more obsessed with energy management. And energy, your own personal levels of energy. And it was great listening to General Gedney there before about that your own personal levels of energy are critical, and then you can deal with virtually anything that the day throws you. And that embraces all sorts of things like nutrition, food and drink intake, physical exercise, rest and recuperation, emotional well-being, mental well-being. And if all that's being taken care of, then you can be at your best when you need to be at your most best in a very difficult period. So I'd say it's not over, but that's been the journey so far.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Bill. And I don't know how I can possibly have missed your amazing appointment in May 19 as CEO of Rugby Football Union. So apologies for that slip as well. Look, actually, what you mentioned there, Bill, is a good segue into trying to pin down what exactly those future challenges, I think, could be into the future. So if we start with you, then Bill, it'd be good for you to reiterate a few things and then finish with you, Rich. So Sue, future challenges.
Yeah, I think that the challenge for us all is not having any sense, as Bill said, as to when this ends. Most crises, you can kind of anticipate where it's going to stop. This one is really difficult because it's ongoing. I've used two words to describe what I for my colleagues that we're thinking about and looking at. One is adaptability and the other is agility. And I think our challenges are about not just where we work. We've discovered that we don't have to trek around and necessarily, that we can work from home. But there are things we've missed doing that. We're all very conscious that we've missed that sense of unity and togetherness, that emotional connection. You just don't, I mean, as much as we all now live on Teams, or I feel like I live on Teams or Zoom, you know, it isn't the same as that human contact. So, however, I do think there'll be a new way of working. You know, we keep doing return to the office policies, and then of course it all falls down the hill again. But there is a reality that we won't return to what there was. So it's how do we define the new environment? What is going to help us be the most productive? So thinking about where we work, how we work, and you know, I can confess to this entire audience that I am, you know, the world's worst at IT. But like a lot of people, I've had to live on it. So one of the things that's transformed my life in the last 6 months is I've actually understood it. I've really begun to learn. I've always had somebody to go to when I had a problem. I haven't been able to do that. So I think we've all learned something through this crisis. And I've said to my colleagues, don't forget those things. Those are important. What we've all learned is we've had to learn differently. We've had to think differently. We've had to behave differently. Don't park it all and think, oh, well, that was when we had a crisis, because I think we've learned a lot and developed a lot. So I think adaptability, the ability to kind of mobilize people in a different way, I think is going to be critical. And I do think as we move forward, this notion of agility, you know, this ability to find other ways of doing things. So for me, you know, I have a group of people who work with me, and some of them are mavericks, and I've kind of rather let them loose to come up with new and creative answers. But I want everybody to think about the agility. We had a conversation today about the fact that, like Bill, you know, our England teams can have, particularly our age group teams, we can't bring them on camp anymore because they're meant to be at home. They can't travel. Our academies for our young players are no longer able to work because they're considered to be grassroots, not elite. So today we had a really great session talking about, well, see this as an opportunity. You know, there's two things we need to work on, technical and physical development. How do we do that in their home? How do we take something to them rather than them come to us? How do we drive a digital engagement with us that we've not done before? So the answer is being really agile, not getting stuck in trying to go back to something. We'll never go back. We've learned a lot. We have to go forward and take the learnings that have happened, be willing to adapt the way you work, how you work, what you do, and be agile. And those things for me are real challenges for our colleagues and our businesses, because we're never going to go back to what we had. And we, leaders of our organizations, have got to define what the new normal looks like. And we've got to support our colleagues to define it for themselves and to find a better, more productive way of working.
Thank you. Bill?
Yeah, again, some similarities. I think, you know, when you look back into when life was normal, pre-COVID, and you realize that there's a huge amount of things that you do just because you've always done them. And what this has forced us to do is really look at the return on our investment. When I say return on investment, if you're going to spend time, if people are going to spend time, if you're going to spend money and resources, which are now becoming much more finite and less, then you've really got to get some return for that. So I think going forward, we're going to be a lot more ruthless in terms of what are the things that we have to do that really do deliver a difference, and just not do the stuff that was just there because everyone used to do that. So that's one thing. That also takes you into, I believe, one of the great benefits that's come out of the last 7 or 8 months is much higher levels of trust. I mean, I was the worst supporter of working from home. You know, if somebody said, I'm going to work from home on a Friday, you'd say, okay, which golf course are you going to? Or, what are you going to do for lunch or whatever? And we've had to trust people to deliver working remotely now. And you realize that actually there's a way to balance this off between work and life where we can come out with a much better outcome. But that will mean also redefining how you measure and monitor output. So maybe we need to look at different, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's a more comfortable world, but how do you look at more regular KPIs? How do you look at more regular objectives, and how are they screened on a more regular basis? And how do you make sure you're doing things within your own time? And if you can do it in 4 days, great, do it in 4 days. If you can do it in 5.5, fine. But I think a greater level of trust and looking at different ways of working will definitely come about. So very specific ones for us. I think we've got to, we're desperately worried about losing a generation of young players in the game, because kids are getting out of the habit of playing sport, and they're getting out of the habit and the routine and the ritual of going down on a Saturday, Sunday morning and playing. So we've got to get that back. And we're desperately worried about that if this lockdown goes for any much longer, or we go into a third one. So we've got to find ways to incentivize kids to come back and play sport again. There's going to be a lengthy period of rebuilding some of the financial structures in the grassroots game. And it'll take us, I think, 4 or 5 years to rebuild that back. So that's a major challenge for us. And we've also got to reinstill confidence in the fans and the public to come back to mass gatherings and mass events and feel a degree of safety. So there's an onus on us to prove to them and exhibit that you can actually come to a stadium, you can be part of 80,000 people, and you can feel safe. So I think that's something we've got to work on as well. I haven't touched on one other topic as well, which has been critical to the whole thing, which is communication. There's different ways to communicate. How do you get your message through in a way that it's really understood in a very simple manner? I found it amazing watching the US election unfold, and there was a figure there that Trump voters, 48% of Trump voters believe that COVID is being handled very effectively. So people will believe what they want to believe, regardless. So how do you cut through that? And how do you have really effective communications going all the way through the game, cutting through the levels, getting to the players, getting to the clubs, to make sure you're getting your message out there and get it across. So I'm excited by it. I think we could be heading into, once we get out of the desperate issues of medical safety, once we get through that, I think we'll end up in a far better place.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Richard, any views on those future challenges and perhaps any opportunities that might be out there?
Thank you.
Here we go, Rich. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the challenges specifically for leaders are mostly behavioural and cultural. I think Bill has talked eloquently about some of the financial challenges, operational challenges. I feel qualified to talk a little bit more about behavioural and cultural. Behavioural because, as many of our panellists have exhibited, the kind of qualities that certainly our people want to see exhibited. We've seen on show today leaders who are humble, leaders who are positive. I agree with Bill wholeheartedly. Nobody wants to follow a pessimist. So whilst we wish to be candid and truthful, and there are no degrees of that, one either is or one isn't, one also has to put a kind of a sense of hope out there for people to grip. So I think there are some kind of personal qualities that I would be looking for leaders to exhibit more and more. Constancy right up there. I think that the ability to lead with values, as some of our previous panelists have discussed, to lead with purpose and not to fall prey to what's pragmatic in the moment, not to allow survival and the need to just make it through this week, the expediency that's sometimes needed to cut across the foundation values of an organization. So some behavioral things. The one thing I would like to leave with the group is this notion of creativity and innovation, because what's been abundantly clear and what shows the way forward in terms of opportunity, Lucy, is people have found remarkable solutions to seemingly intractable problems at lightning speed. It's just extraordinary how new partnerships have formed, new collaborations have taken place, new decisions have been taken at pace that would otherwise have suffered through the treacle of the no zone and decision-taking bureaucracy. The key challenge for leaders is how they can embed that sustainably going forward, how they can remove the classic obstacles to creative thinking. And there are so many, how you remove those on an ongoing basis and keep people's creative muscle alive, kicking, and as well as their physical health, their mental health, because that creative muscle will be the muscle that allows people to bridge the gap between coming out of the kind of height of the crisis and moving into improving the way we do things around here, both for people and indeed for planet. So I think creativity is the #1 challenge for leaders, and fostering a culture which promotes that, celebrates it, makes it possible, and eliminates everything that gets in the way of it.
I mean, there's just so much protein here in this discussion. What I'm taking out of that is the importance of trust, the clarity of purpose, communication, creative challenges, as you've mentioned, Richard, behaviours, creative muscle, and you know, there's a lot of synergy, I think, with some of the previous discussions in the last 2 panels, if you listened into that. So it seems we're all sort of on that sort of message. But it's I'm going to switch actually to a couple of questions, because we're getting some questions coming in now, if you're all okay with that. And do weave in any opportunities that you see that we could be working on to you know, in the context of this crisis. But the first one, Sue, this one's for you, and it says the FA do a tremendous job in holistically supporting an athlete's development. With the pandemic, some athletes may be facing uncertainty and the very real situation of their careers coming to a possible end. Do you see dual career development as essential in providing a new challenge and supporting eventual transition? So if you'd like to answer that, and I suspect it'll be similar in your world, Bill, as well. So, Sue.
Yeah, I mean, we've made a massive commitment for dual career since I came in. I you know, it was one of the things that when I was working at UK Sport, you know, when you see the commitment Olympic and Paralympic athletes give you over, and you know, it's really, really important, I think, that you have some concern for aftercare. And in the women's game, while you know salaries are increasing, they are still absolutely pretty basic salaries that players are getting, and therefore I think it's really important that we encourage, support, mentor, whatever it takes to help people develop new careers. So, you know, in our England team, we have someone trained to be an accountant. We have 2 people who are doing degrees, one doing a PhD. We have other people who are wanting to learn a foreign language. I personally don't care what the dual career bit is. I think learning is important. I think it comes back to something Richard said, which is this sort of mental readiness to move on. And I think players need it. They need that alertness. And so we've built dual career now into our pathway all the way through. And we're very committed to it, and we've just done a huge report on it that we're looking at, so we're implementing. So, you know, I always say every player is you know, one injury away from retirement, and certainly in the women's game, there are no women, not even our, you know, our very best, like Lucy and Steph, who are going to be rich enough when they finish to not have to earn a living doing something. And there has sort of always been a bit of an assumption that players want to go on and coach or referee. Well, some of them don't want anything to do with the game when they finish. And I think we're obligated to provide them with all the support we can to help them prepare for that life beyond sport. And all the research we did at UK Sport tells us that athletes who are engaged in that dual career study, which again, you know, we've got to be flexible in the way you do it, whether that's through a university modular program or in whatever way, it has to be flexible. But the ones who are engaged in that actually perform better because they have this mental stimulation beyond the constant physical drain on them. So I think we're very committed to it, and it's something we've got still a lot of work to do, but it's a huge part of what we're doing.
Bill, have you got anything to add from rugby point of view?
Yeah, I think there's an awful lot more that we can do and we should be doing. I mean, I had 10 years in the US, and I was able to have a good look at the NCAA system there, which is their collegiate sports system, which leads into professional sport as well. Not always, but does. We have a thing called the developing player pathway, where kids aged under 14s will be identified as being of significant talent, and then they'll go through age grade county rugby, and if they're fortunate enough, they get picked up by an academy, and there are 14 of those around the country. And if they then make it to professional level rugby, that would be their career. Now, the success rate for that is very low, as it is in most professional sport. And I'm concerned that we don't offer not just dual pathways, but really triple pathways. We've got a fantastic university network out there. You've got some great universities like Exeter and Loughborough and Durham, and you could reel them off. There's probably about 7 or 8 really good sports universities. I'd like to find a way to adapt our pathway where it's aligned to that university system, where we can offer, if you're going to be on that development player pathway and you go to an academy, then you have the option. In fact, maybe it's not an option, you make it compulsory. You have an educational parallel development area there, but not just educational, because not all players are educationally minded. So a vocational one as well. So if you don't make it in the game, you've got a skill in construction or in plumbing or whatever, but something which is going to be your safety net, because frankly, the percentage rates of success are very low. And in rugby, you're one game away from an injury, which might stop you playing. So we need to do an awful lot more. And it's one of the things that we're now focusing on.
Thank you. Richard, I've got a question for you to start off with. From your experience, how do you balance sharing your mistakes to your team to show humility and demonstrate a safe to fail culture and not losing their confidence by the potential of the mistake being seen as too great? So this is a question about sharing mistakes, balance with, showing your true self, perhaps.
Well, the general was generous enough to answer that question a little bit by saying, we've come to him and he's made more mistakes in his career than many. He put it out there. I don't feel any less certain that the general is a highly credible, competent leader of his people. So I think to show some vulnerability is to win people's trust. And I think to put out this kind of image of oneself, to curate this perfect leader who never makes mistakes is not going to wash with anybody, because we're all riddled with insecurity. We all know we make mistakes. We also know that the best of us learn from those mistakes and do something positive with that experience. So in terms of balance, I think the leader who is humble, the leader who is open, the leader who is utterly transparent, to utter those words, by the way, we talked a lot about clarity of communication. I think the clearest answer often to a question needs to be these 3 magic words: I don't know. And I think that can be the start of the magic of finding some innovative, creative solution. So I think far more humility, far more admission of failure, without, of course, losing people's trust that you are competent. You can bring the ship into harbour without bumping it every single time. That would be helpful. It's a judgment call, it's contextual, but I do think we warm to leaders who put themselves right out there. Somebody mentioned the great mayor of New York and how he responded to the crisis. My own particular favourite leader through this crisis has been Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who we saw from her sitting room being completely open that she didn't have all the answers. That's the kind of leader I trust 100%.
Absolutely, thank you.
Can I just add something to that?
Go for it, Sue. Yeah.
I totally agree with every word that Richard just said, but I think for many of the women that I know who are in leadership positions, they feel showing vulnerability is a weakness. And I think that building that confidence that you can be vulnerable, that you don't have to prove every few minutes that you're the best, is it's a very different thing, I sometimes think, for women in leadership than men. Yes. And I'm sure it's true across the board, but I think for women quite often, because of a lack of confidence in their own sense as a leader, they're very less willing to show that vulnerability because they think it'll be seen as weakness. And I think that's a really fine balance you have to find. And you have to really be very confident in yourself to be willing to be vulnerable. And I think that's a really important part of supporting colleagues and making sure that colleagues who show you vulnerability are supported through that and told that that's a really important part of being emotionally connected to people and part of how people want to be led. But it's an interest. I agree with Richard completely. I think it's quite a difficult thing to do there.
Yeah, well, I can certainly relate to the points you made there, Sue, that's for sure. This is a question to all the panelists, and this has come from one of the team. What were your cornerstones in dealing with the crisis in front of you? What were they, or what are they? What's the key thing in dealing with the crisis in front of you? So, Bill, do you want to have a go at this one first?
Yeah, quite simple for me, I think. Team. It was just, I knew I had a good team already. I didn't quite realize how good they were. And every single one of them has more than just stepped up to it. And I think that was through just being totally transparent about the challenge at hand, going back to that word again about trust, delegating responsibility to other people, and just functioning as a team and checking in daily. So that for me was the absolute cornerstone, the power of the team.
Sue, have you got anything?
I've written down dog walks. Because that's what's kept me sane. And, you know, people have mentioned physical and mental well-being. And I walk my two naughty children every morning for an hour and a bit, probably at 6:30. So I've been watching the sun come up recently. Really, really important part of my day. It's my physical exercise, but it also gives me that mental space I need to kind of think about those things that are crashing in on me, because we all need that space. Because I spend the rest of the day on Teams, it feels to me, and then out I go again with the dogs at night. So I think that kind of creating that space for yourself we've talked about physical and mental wellness. Each of us finds it in a different place, but that mental space to think is critical, I think, to helping you manage. And then, like Bill, you know, surrounded by positivity, good people, you know, each of them having their moments of up and down. I mean, you know, they haven't certainly stayed all of them positive all of the time, but just supporting them individually to cope with those down moments, but surrounded by great team, and together, I think we would say we've come through this in some ways stronger as a unit. But Richard said, you know, what Richard said was really important. The creativity that's been generated during this period has been exceptional. And that comes from great people who are prepared to find, you know, that they're so mission driven. They so know what the end goal is, that no matter what you stick in front of them, what block, what challenge, COVID included, they're going to find a way over it, under it, round it, or through it. So that mission belief is critical in helping people drive through, you know, and finding those creative solutions. So, yeah, dog walks and team would be my two.
Thank you, Richard.
Quick one from me to amplify Sue. I'll go personally, it's meditation twice a day, absolutely without fail. That's the biggest crutch I've had. I discovered it 18 years ago, and it is the single thing that keeps me relatively calm and energetic. Professionally, to build on team, I would say purpose at Saatchi Worldwide. If we did anything and got it wrong, we were forgiven if it was attempting to advance the purpose of the enterprise. So purpose and values are your permission to be who you wish to be, to advance the company agenda. And it's your insurance policy. Your very best ally in a crisis is that mission that you've agreed amongst the leaders and the values by which you do business and build a team together.
Yeah, it keeps you honest, doesn't it? It keeps you focused and you know where you're going. And also, I suppose, also you can see where people deviate and when you need to bring them back in when they're not quite on point. And the point you made about the value of the team and that you've all mentioned, we have a piece in the army, you know, people are not in the army, we are the army. So it's the same in your organisations, I'm sure. We may have touched on some of this, but welcome to amplify it. This is a question that's come in about how leaders manage their own anxiety in a crisis so that they are able to fully operate and support their followers. I think you've all talked a bit about mental well-being and in teams and perhaps some personal ways of dealing with that. But is there any other areas to manage any of your own internal anxieties that you've come across? Bill, have you got a view on that?
I think keeping things in perspective, really. Things can look extremely dark at certain points in time, but they will get better. They will inevitably get better. And life is never one flat line. It's a series of ups and downs. It's a series of sprints rather than a marathon. So when things are particularly difficult or it's taken a turn for the worse, my immediate start point is to take one step away and say, we'll get through this and we'll recover, and next day will be different.
Brilliant. Thank you. Richard.
Well, I would cast yourself a circle of people that you trust 100%, and with whom you're completely at ease to share one's vulnerability and anxiety. So I come there to the research I did with among consiglieri, the trust advisors, the people who lead for the leader. The great leaders, the really highly accountable leaders and the effective ones are those that do cast deliberately a very diverse circle of consiglieri around them, at least one of whom should be their trusted confidant, the person in whom you can literally confess as if you're in a confessional booth, because to share one's anxiety with somebody who you trust like that is to literally lift the burden off your shoulders. So I'd have at least one of those in your close-knit circle of leadership team.
Thank you, Richard. And final word from you, Sue.
Richard stole my thunder. I was going to talk about sharing. An anxiety shared is hard, or an anxiety halved is always my view. And I do think it's really important to have very different people, sometimes inside the business and outside the business, that you can share those anxieties with, because sometimes they're professional and sometimes they feel deeply personal. I'm not sure if I'm making the right decision here. Might be a professional issue, or you want to talk to a few people about that. But this is really upsetting me. It's a very personal thing. And I think you've got to be able to share both of those sort of deep emotional reactions to things and those problem-solving pieces where, as a leader, you've got to make a decision, but you're not, none of us are omnipotent, and none of us can always make the right decisions. And being able to talk that through with people and perhaps rephrase it, refocus it, is really important. So and again, I'm going to say dog walking, aren't I? I mean, for me, and Bill said it, the one thing about going out every day, because you can't say to dogs, I don't feel like walking today, you have to go. Come rain or shine, every day is a new day for them. And it's a great lesson. They get up every day, and it doesn't matter that you take them to the same place you took them yesterday and the same smells are there. And to them, this is exciting. This is another day, a great walk. There's something about that kind of gives you're right, this is a new start every day. So it's where you get that energy from, I guess.
Brilliant. Well, I'm afraid we've got to end the discussion and the question and answer session there. To those that are listening in, thank you so much for all your questions and for keeping the panel here on their toes. And I'd like to thank them on your behalf for their insight, for being themselves, and for offering such insights. It's fantastic. So thank you, Baroness Sue Campbell, Bill Sweeney, and Richard Heitner. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Colonel, thank you very much indeed for that session. And that brings us to a close for today. I've been given the unenviable task of trying to summarise the tour de force that was this afternoon's session before handing over to Bob Reeves for some final thoughts. I think encouraging for me is that whilst the context changes, the fundamentals of leadership absolutely endure. And much of what we heard today is familiar across all sectors. And I'd like to draw my summary together by focusing through the prism of the Army leadership model, which, for those of you who know, John Adair's task team and individual will be very familiar with. And the role of the leader is to manage the interplay and balance the interplay and the demands of the task, the mission, the team, and the individuals they are leading, including themselves, all within the context of the environment in which they're operating. So first and foremost, and a number of people spoke about it today, it's about understanding the context, that environment in which you're operating. The very nature of crisis is that the environment is likely to be uncertain, ambiguous, and dynamic. Thereafter, in relating to the task, it's about having clear purpose, clear vision and intent, consistency of purpose, as Baroness Sue would say, the rudder through crisis. It's about creating clarity and maintaining a consistent communication of that clarity to your people. Communication, 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 up, down, left and right. And communication is about listening as well as speaking. Making decisions. One of the key roles of any leader in or out of crisis is about making decisions, standing up to the plate and deciding when it counts. And as one of our speakers today said, it's about speed over decision making. So don't wait for the perfect solution, because in crisis, you're not going to get one. The environment is too dynamic. In terms of the team then, it's about building trust. Trust is the glue that binds. And you can't lead without trust. And it's your role as a leader to instill that. And the very best leaders instinctively trust people first and allow them to fail that trust rather than the other way around. And the best way of engendering trust is to empower your people. The importance of diversity of thought and experience, perhaps more than other more binary metrics, albeit they are important as well. And how do you foster and nurture that diversity of thought and experience? How do you encourage challenge and give a voice to the disruptors? Remove the obstacles for creative thinking, as we heard towards the end there. Using your network, building and using your network, that team of team approach is critical through crisis. And then collectively, how are you going to learn as a team to drive forward? And at the individual level, because leadership is all about people, as we've heard consistently throughout today, it's about knowing your people. And that's pretty difficult sometimes when you're projected into new teams in crisis, or you're trying to lead remotely. But you've got to know your people. You've got to find the time to know them. And that includes yourself, because leadership starts with the leader, and that's you. And we've also heard quite a lot about resilience. Resilience, again, in the people you're leading, resilience in the organization, in your culture you're creating. But most importantly, or as importantly, resilience in yourself as a leader, mental, physical, and emotional. And we heard time and time again, perhaps some of the most important takeaways: lead with humility and lead according to your values. Lead with humility and lead according to your values. I also like to draw on Frank's comment about leadership being an action, a verb. So what are you going to do tomorrow to make a difference? How are you going to be a better leader based on what you've heard today? How are you going to look back and reflect on not just the lessons for today, but your own lessons as you've navigated through crisis? And how are you going to foster the opportunities and the advances you've made, your teams have made in your organizations? And how are you going to inculcate them into the way you do things to make yourself a better leader? So that leaves me just to say a sincere thanks to you all for attending today, and also to Bob Reeves, most importantly, Bob Reeves and the Foundation for Leadership Through Sport for supporting us, being a great partner and enabling this fantastic event today. Really do appreciate your partnership, Bob. I'd like to leave you with the words of Mr. Eddie Jones, who said today, "My job is to make sure the environment is stimulating enough to make our people leave with a smile." And I hope we've done that for you today.
Thanks so much, Langley. Those words are greatly appreciated. I picked up a couple, if I might add to yours. One is that the crisis has led to more innovation and creativity than ever in the past. And remarkably for many, it's been seen as an opportunity. The crisis creates the opportunity to learn a lot about ourselves and our teams and our organizations. And how we adapt is our challenge. How we take the opportunity is something for us to develop from. It was also said we should use the word I less and we more, because working more as teams, that's what people have thought, more about the collective effort than the individual contribution. I like that. And then it was said also on a couple of occasions, stay fit. And I like that as well. So just finally, everyone who's been involved today has given his or her time, knowledge and experience free of charge. And it's enabled us to provide the conference without cost. So for the last time, if I might just say, if you haven't done yet, if you could make a contribution to the Royal British Legion in Remembrance Week, when much of its important fundraising has been adversely affected, that would be hugely appreciated. I would also say that the Foundation for Leadership Through Sport places recordings of all events on its website for members only. And the good news is it's free to be a member. So if you're interested at all in seeing this through our site, look at www.flsport.net and you'll see how you can join. None of this would have been possible without the marvellous team here at Sandhurst. Colonel Langley Sharp, Major Ben Acton, WO Chris Nichol and others have shown real conciliary attributes in leading from the shadows. For this, we're all extremely thankful. Like all the best leaders, they're great to work with. I would like to say that we've had up to 1,700 people taking part today. It's been a terrific collaborative effort, and we would love to keep working with you on future events, Langley, because we all gain a lot from it. Thank you very much, everybody.